Okay, so get this. Today we're diving deep into staffing strategies in this crazy economy. It's like everyone's trying to figure out this whole hiring puzzle,
Well,
right?
totally. It's a wild ride out there.
Yeah, and this Instawork report you sent, it's like they peeked into everyone's business and laid out all the secrets. But seriously, one of the first things that jumped out at me was how many businesses are struggling with staffing because it's just so unpredictable now.
Absolutely. And this report actually put some numbers on it. Did you know that 34% of businesses had to give up revenue because they didn't have enough staff?
34%.
Seriously, yeah. It's wild, right? That's like telling a third of businesses, sorry, you can't serve all those customers who are ready to spend money.
Ouch. Talk about a punch to the gut. And it's not just about not having enough people, right? The report also talks about how tricky it is to forecast staffing needs in this economy. Like, do you hire up expecting a boom or play it safe and risk being short-staffed?
It's a tough call, and a lot of businesses are feeling the pressure. The old playbooks just don't seem to cut it anymore.
It's like trying to navigate by the stars in broad daylight.
Exactly. And that's where this whole idea of a layered approach to staffing comes in.
Oh, layered approach. Now, you've got my attention. Break it down for me. What's the deal with this layered approach?
So picture this. Instead of just thinking about permanent versus temporary workers, you've got this more nuanced system with three distinct layers.
3 layers, like a staffing cake.
Exactly. It's all about creating a more flexible and resilient workforce.
Okay, I'm hooked. What does this staffing cake look like?
All right, so your base layer, your foundation, is your permanent workforce.
Makes sense, the solid crew that keeps things running day in and day out.
Right. They bring that deep knowledge and experience you can't just create overnight.
Got it. So what's the next layer up?
This is where it gets interesting. This is your recurring layer. Think trusted freelancers, familiar faces who know the ropes, but also value flexibility.
Okay, so they're not just random temps you bring in for a week.
Exactly. It's more about building relationships with these workers who can provide support on a regular basis.
So it's about finding people who get it and can hit the ground running because they're already familiar with how things work.
You got it. And then at the very top, you've got your short-term layer. These are your pinch hitters, your seasonal support, the folks you bring in for specific limited time needs.
So it's like having a secret weapon in your back pocket ready to go when things get crazy.
Exactly. And by strategically combining these three layers, you create a staffing system that's adaptable and resilient, able to weather those unexpected storms.
I love it. It's like having the best of both worlds, right? Stability and flexibility.
You nailed it. And it's not just good for businesses, it's a win for workers too. But we can dive into those details a bit later.
Okay, you're killing me with the cliffhangers. But fine, we can wait. First, let's take a quick break, and then we'll be back to break down how this layered approach actually works in the real world. And we're back, folks, ready to dig deeper into this whole layered staffing thing, because I am. So we've got these 3 layers: permanent, recurring, and short-term. But I got to ask, how does this actually work in, like, different industries? A fancy restaurant can't staff the same way as, say, a huge shipping company, right?
You're totally right. It's definitely not one size fits all.
Right.
And the report actually gets into those specifics.
Oh, good.
They dove deep into this one logistics company, and get this. They found that really focusing on building up that recurring layer, those familiar faces, it actually made their whole operation more productive. And he saved them money.
Wait, hold on. Seriously. Because the first thing that pops into my head with temporary workers is, ooh, expensive. Agency fees, all that jazz.
I know, right? You figure you got to spend money to make money, but this company actually flipped the script.
Oh, tell me more. How'd they swing that?
Well, the report highlighted how they actually reduced their overall labor costs by like 15% just by optimizing that middle layer, the recurring workers.
Okay, now you're just showing off. 15%, someone give these people a staffing award or something. But seriously, what's the secret sauce? What were they doing differently?
It all comes down to playing the long game. See, by having those recurring workers, they cut back on constantly having to train new people, which saves a ton of time and money. Plus, their core staff weren't getting burnt out from covering gaps all the time, so they spent less on overtime. And get this, those recurring workers, they were more productive.
Talk about a triple win. Saving money, boosting productivity,
Yeah.
and I bet those recurring workers feel more valued, even if they're not full-time.
Exactly. And that brings up a really important point. This layered approach isn't just good for employers, it's a win for workers too. It gives them flexibility, the chance to learn new skills. Some even end up with permanent positions down the line if they want them.
Okay, that's huge. It's like creating opportunities instead of just filling a slot on a schedule. Love it. But Let's switch gears for a sec.
Yeah.
How does this whole layered thing work in a totally different industry, like, say, a restaurant? Talk about high turnover.
You're telling me. It seems almost impossible, right?
Right.
But the report actually uses restaurants as an example of how this approach can actually create a more stable and even motivating environment for those workers. Like, someone might start as a busser, then move up to serving because they're already familiar with everything from those recurring shifts, maybe even end up in management one day.
So it's like building a talent pipeline from within. That's got to be huge for morale, especially in an industry where, let's face it, that can be a challenge sometimes.
For sure. Plus, think about the logistics of finding last-minute replacements in a restaurant.
Oh, don't even get me started. How many times have our dinner plans been messed up because the place was short-staffed? Too many. Okay, but restaurants, logistics, we've covered those.
Mm-hmm.
What about something like healthcare? That feels like a whole other beast. The stakes are so much higher.
Right. You can't exactly tell someone to wait till next week. We're short a nurse this week.
Exactly.
The report actually pointed out how healthcare, along with grocery stores and a few others, tend to be a bit more resistant to those economic ups and downs. But even then, a layered approach can be a game changer.
So how does it work in healthcare then? I mean, I can't imagine patients would be thrilled to see a revolving door of unfamiliar faces in a hospital.
Totally agree. That's why that permanent staff is so crucial in healthcare.
Makes sense.
But what's interesting is how they use that recurring layer. Instead of relying so much on on-call staff, they're creating this whole pool of trusted, familiar workers who can fill those gaps and provide more specialized skills on a regular basis.
That makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
You're still keeping that consistency and experience, which feels extra important in healthcare. Okay, so we're seeing how this can work in all sorts of fields, but let's be real. We've talked a lot about the upsides, but what about the bottom line? Is this layered approach actually easier on the budget in the long run? Because I'll be honest, every time I hear temporary worker, I think, ka-ching, there goes the budget.
Sure.
But you know what they say, right? It all comes down to the bottom line. So is this layered approach actually, easier on the budget in the long run?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right. Because, I don't know about you, but when I hear temporary worker, I hear dollar signs.
Oh, I hear you. It seems like bringing in people who aren't on your regular payroll would mean, well, spending more, right?
Right.
But this report, it actually challenges us to think a little differently about that, like to look beyond just the hourly rate.
Okay. How so?
Well, it digs into all those hidden costs that come with, traditional employees. Things like benefits, paid time off, even the cost of finding and training new hires, it all adds up.
It's like that old saying, the tip of the iceberg. We see the hourly wage, but all that other stuff is lurking below the surface.
Exactly. And what they found is that when you factor in all those extra costs, the price difference between permanent and non-permanent workers, sometimes it's not as big as you might think.
Interesting. So you're saying it could actually be more budget-friendly to bring in more of those recurring workers?
It can be, especially when you think about how it impacts everything else. Like, less turnover means you're not constantly spending money on training, plus less need for overtime, happier core staff. It all ties together.
It's like a domino effect. But okay, say I'm a business owner. I'm sold on this whole layered approach. How do I even begin to figure out what my ideal mix looks like?
That's where things get really practical. And the report actually lays out some clear steps businesses can take.
Oh, good. Lay it on me.
First things first, data is your best friend. You got to track your labor costs super carefully, really understand where your money is going.
Right. You can't fix what you don't know is broken.
Exactly. Then take a hard look at your staffing patterns. Where are the bottlenecks? When are you swamped? When's it smooth sailing?
Knowledge is power.
You got it. And you know what? Don't be afraid to experiment. Try different staffing models, see what sticks.
Be flexible.
Exactly, because the old ways don't always work in this new world.
Truer words have never been spoken. And on that note, I want to say a huge thank you to our listeners. We've thrown a lot of information your way today, but the conversation doesn't stop here. Head over to our social media and let us know your thoughts. What are your staffing secrets in this crazy economy? We'll see you next time.